Picture this moment unfolding in the quiet hush of a suburban Ohio evening, where the sun hangs low and lazy over rooftops that all look a little too much like the ones from my childhood memories, casting long shadows that stretch across the driveway and into the kitchen where I'm sitting alone with a single cupcake from the grocery store down the street. Its frosting slightly smudged from the drive home, and the candle on top already leaning crooked because no one else was around to steady it while I lit the flame. It's my 42nd birthday, the kind of milestone that should feel like a quiet triumph after all these years of plugging away at life. But instead the air fills with the muffled thump of bass and laughter spilling over from the house next door, where my brother David is hosting yet another one of his over-the-top celebrations, complete with catered trays of sliders and ribs, an open bar stocked with craft beers that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and guests toasting his every joke as if he hung the moon all by himself. For as long as I can recall, this has been the rhythm of our family gatherings, the way birthdays divide into feasts for the favored and afterthoughts for the rest, with me, Emily Harper, always landing squarely in the latter category while David basks in the glow of attention that seems to follow him like a personal spotlight wherever he goes. Growing up in that modest split-level home on Maple Street, the one with the creaky front porch swing and Dad's faded American flag waving from the pole out front, everything revolved around David's orbit from the very start. His every scraped knee or schoolyard victory drawing Mom into a whirlwind of sympathy and praise, while my own achievements, like the straight A's I earned through late nights hunched over textbooks in my cramped bedroom, barely registered beyond a distracted "that's nice, dear," before the conversation swung back to his latest football game or science fair project that somehow always took first place, even if it was mostly borrowed ideas from the library books I recommended. Dad, with his calloused hands from years at the auto plant and his unwavering belief in the American dream of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, would clap David on the back after every little win, recounting the stories at family dinners around the oak table that Mom polished religiously every Sunday after church, while I sat there passing the mashed potatoes and wondering why my efforts to save for college tuition by babysitting the neighbors' kids never earned even a fraction of that enthusiasm, leaving me to piece together my path through community college loans that I paid off penny by penny without a single word of encouragement from the people who should have had my back. By the time we reached our 20s and scattered into adult lives that pulled us in different directions, the pattern had solidified into something unbreakable, like the grooves worn into the linoleum floor from years of pacing during holiday arguments that always circled back to David's needs. Whether it was bailing him out after a string of bad dates that left him short on rent, or celebrating his promotion at the insurance firm with a backyard barbecue that drew half the neighborhood, while my own quiet advancements at the accounting office, where I climbed from data entry to senior analyst through sheer reliability and long hours, went unmentioned in the family newsletter that Mom insisted on sending out every Christmas. Last year marked the starkest contrast yet, with David turning 40 in a whirlwind weekend getaway to Las Vegas that featured blackjack tables, showgirl performances, and a stack of gifts from relatives who traveled cross-country to be there, all captured in glossy photos that flooded the group chat, while I received a belated text from Mom wishing me well on my birthday, accompanied by a digital card featuring balloons and the number 41 in faded pastels, as if that could make up for the empty chair at my table and the silence that echoed louder than any party noise ever could. This particular birthday, however, carried a different undercurrent, a subtle shift that I hadn't anticipated until earlier that week when my boss, Mr. Reynolds, called me into his corner office with its view of the downtown skyline and the faint scent of his ever-present black coffee lingering in the air, sliding across the desk an envelope that felt heavier than it should have for something so transformative. His words carrying the weight of genuine appreciation as he explained how my consistent performance had earned me a discretionary bonus of $50,000, untaxed and unadvertised, a windfall born from years of being the one who stayed late to balance the books and caught the errors that could have cost the company dearly. That check, once deposited into my unassuming savings account, opened doors I had long imagined but never dared to walk through, visions of a personal retreat somewhere far from the familiar pull of family obligations, perhaps a cozy cabin nestled by a serene lake where the only demands came from the rustle of leaves and the lap of water against the shore, a place I could claim entirely as my own without the need for approval or applause from those who had overlooked me time and again. As the evening wore on and the sounds from David's party began to fade into the night, replaced by the distant hum of crickets and the occasional car passing by on the main road, I struck a match to that solitary candle, watching the flame dance unsteadily before drawing in a breath that carried all the unspoken frustrations of those ignored years, then exhaling slowly as I made a wish not for their sudden change of heart, but for the courage to rewrite my own story on terms that finally centered me. With the cupcake half-eaten and crumbs scattered on the napkin beside me, I pulled out my laptop and began scrolling through real estate listings that appeared like hidden treasures on the screen, my eyes drawn immediately to a property in the Poconos that promised exactly the escape I craved, its description evoking images of wooden beams overhead, a stone fireplace crackling on cool evenings, and a deck overlooking waters that stretched out calm and inviting under the Pennsylvania sky. The price tag hovered just within reach of my newfound funds, and before doubt could creep in to second-guess the impulse, I composed an email to the listing agent requesting a private viewing for the upcoming weekend, my fingers hovering over the send button for only a moment before committing to the click that set everything in motion. Lying in bed later, with the house settled into its nighttime quiet and the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains, my mind raced with possibilities that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Wondering how the family would react if they ever learned of this bold step I was taking in secret, whether their surprise would manifest as congratulations or the kind of resentment that had simmered beneath the surface for so long. And as sleep finally tugged at the edges of my thoughts, a single question lingered like the echo of that party music. What happens when the overlooked one finally steps into the light on her own terms, without waiting for an invitation that never comes? The morning after that solitary birthday ritual, with sunlight filtering through the half-drawn blinds of my bedroom window and casting striped patterns across the rumpled sheets that still carried the faint scent of vanilla from the cupcake I'd left on the nightstand, I rose with a resolve that felt both fragile and unyielding, brewing a pot of coffee strong enough to chase away the lingering haze of disappointment while my thoughts drifted back to the patterns that had shaped our family dynamics long before any bonus check or secret listing could alter the course. As the aroma filled the small kitchen where the counters bore the marks of countless hurried meals prepared alone, I glanced at my phone and saw the group chat already buzzing with remnants of David's celebration. Photos of him grinning amid clusters of friends in polo shirts and khakis, everyone raising glasses to his latest anecdote about closing some deal at work that probably involved more charm than substance, and in that moment the old familiar ache settled in my chest, not quite jealousy but a weary recognition of how effortlessly he commanded the spotlight while I navigated the edges of every scene, always the one to arrive early, stay late, and clean up afterward without a murmur of complaint. Reflecting on those formative years in our childhood home, where the walls echoed with the sounds of Dad's laughter booming from the living room recliner as he recounted David's exploits on the Little League field to anyone who would listen during neighborhood barbecues that stretched into the humid summer evenings, I remembered how the favoritism wove itself into the fabric of our daily lives like an invisible thread pulling everything toward him, from the way Mom would drop everything to help with his homework assignments that he left until the 11th hour, while dismissing my requests for rides to the library with a casual, "You're old enough to figure it out, Emily," to the Christmas mornings when his pile of presents towered under the twinkling lights of our artificial tree, wrapped in paper that crinkled louder than mine ever did. Each gift a testament to the collective indulgence that positioned him as the center of gravity in a household striving for the ideal of middle class normalcy amid the economic squeezes of the 80s and 90s. Even then, small incidents etched the divide deeper, like the time at 14 when I meticulously saved allowance money over months for a second-hand bicycle that would get me to school without relying on the unreliable bus schedule, only for David to take it out for a joyride with his buddies one afternoon and return it bent and scraped after a mishap in the woods behind our street. prompting Dad to shake his head with a chuckle and authorize a replacement from the local bike shop using funds that could have gone toward family groceries, while I was left to patch the damage myself with duct tape and quiet resentment that simmered without ever boiling over into confrontation. Transitioning into our adult phases brought no relief from that lopsided equilibrium, as the years unfolded with David bouncing between jobs that promised grandeur but delivered mediocrity. Each setback met with sympathetic gatherings at our parents' house, where casseroles appeared from neighbors and relatives rallied with loans disguised as gifts, while my steady ascent in the accounting world, marked by certifications earned through night classes after full workdays and promotions that came from spotting discrepancies in ledgers that saved the firm thousands, elicited only passing nods during holiday phone calls that quickly pivoted to updates on his latest venture. Whether it was a failed attempt at real estate flipping or a side hustle in network marketing that drained more energy than it generated revenue. One particularly telling episode unfolded during the Thanksgiving of my 30th year, when I arrived at the family home with arms full of pies baked from scratch using a recipe I'd perfected over solitary weekends, only to spend the afternoon in the kitchen chopping vegetables and setting the table while Mom fussed over David's arrival fashionably late and windswept from a golf outing with colleagues. The meal itself devolving into animated discussions of his potential for advancement at the firm where he handled client relations with a charisma that masked his tendency to overpromise, leaving my contribution to the conversation a dry recounting of balancing a major audit for a client in the manufacturing sector to fade into the background like steam rising from the gravy boat, unspoken and unappreciated. Yet amid this backdrop of entrenched oversight, the arrival of that unexpected bonus acted as a quiet catalyst, transforming the abstract daydreams of independence into tangible steps that I guarded closely from the prying eyes of family scrutiny, allowing me to envision not just survival, but a measure of self-directed flourishing that had eluded me for so long. And it was in this newfound private space that I began to weigh the costs of continued silence against the risks of revelation. The intrusion came predictably enough later that week, as I sat at my desk in the dimly lit home office surrounded by stacks of financial statements and the soft glow of my computer screen displaying preliminary sketches for the Poconos property's layout, when my phone vibrated with a call from Mom, whose voice carried that familiar blend of warmth and expectation honed over decades of managing family crises centered on David, explaining in hushed tones how he faced an urgent repair on his SUV. After it broke down during a commute that sounded more like an unnecessary detour to a sports bar than essential travel, and pleading for my assistance with the bill since you're always so good with numbers and have that steady job we can count on. In that instant, the humor of the situation struck me wryly, imagining the irony of her appealing to my reliability as if it were an infinite resource rather than a hard-won trait forged in the fires of their neglect. And rather than capitulate to the pattern, I responded with measured deflection, suggesting gently that perhaps David could explore options through his extensive network of acquaintances or even a payment plan from the mechanic, all while my mind raced ahead to the weekend appointment that promised a tangible shift away from such entanglements. That Saturday arrived with a crispness in the air that hinted at the changing seasons, and as I maneuvered my sensible sedan along the winding roads leading to the Poconos, the landscape shifting from urban sprawl to rolling hills dotted with autumn foliage in shades of amber and crimson, the real estate agent greeted me at the property with an enthusiasm that matched the listing's allure, guiding me through rooms that breathed potential with their vaulted ceilings and large windows framing views of the lake that stretched out like a mirror reflecting the endless sky. The walkthrough unfolded in a haze of practical questions about utilities and property taxes, interspersed with moments of profound clarity, where I pictured shelves lined with books I'd collected but never had time to read, and evenings spent on the deck with nothing but the sound of loons calling across the water, culminating in the signing of preliminary documents that committed the purchase with a finality that sent a shiver of empowerment through my veins, the pen's scratch on paper echoing louder in my ears than any family applause ever had. Driving back under the gathering dusk, with the agent's confirmation email pinging on my dashboard display and the first hints of twilight painting the horizon in deep indigos, a text from David interrupted the solitude, proposing a casual lunch to catch up and run something by you, its casual phrasing belying the undercurrent of opportunism that I had come to recognize all too well, leaving me to ponder as the miles clicked by whether this overture signaled another request in disguise or the beginning of suspicions about my guarded prosperity, a tension that coiled tighter with each passing exit ramp and set the stage for confrontations yet to unfold. With the ink barely dry on the purchase agreement for the Poconos retreat and the keys to that lakeside haven now jingling softly in the glove compartment of my car like a secret talisman against the familiar pull of family expectations, I slipped into a routine of weekend escapes that allowed me to breathe deeply amid the scent of pine needles carpeting the forest floor and the gentle rhythm of waves lapping against the private dock, transforming what had been a mere fantasy into a lived reality where every unpacked box and hung curtain represented a deliberate choice to prioritize my own peace over the endless cycle of overlooked contributions and unacknowledged efforts that had defined my role in the family for so many years. Those initial visits unfolded in a quiet euphoria, starting with the drive upstate where the highway gave way to narrower roads flanked by stands of birch trees shedding their golden leaves in the crisp autumn breeze, arriving at the property to find the real estate agent handing over the final paperwork with a knowing smile that suggested she had seen her share of clients seeking similar sanctuaries from life's louder demands, and then immersing myself in the tasks of making the space my own. From arranging second-hand furniture sourced from local antique shops that evoked the sturdy simplicity of mid-century American craftsmanship to stocking the pantry with provisions that catered to solitary indulgences like fresh-baked bread from a nearby mill and bottles of local wine that paired perfectly with sunsets viewed from the wraparound porch. In those moments of solitude, surrounded by the natural symphony of birdsong and rustling underbrush, the weight of past birthdays faded slightly, replaced by a tentative sense of empowerment that whispered possibilities I had long deferred. Even as a part of me wondered how long this private joy could remain insulated from the intrusions that had always found their way back to me no matter how carefully I guarded my boundaries. The decision to share a glimpse of this newfound world came almost impulsively one crisp Saturday evening, after a day spent raking leaves into tidy piles that crackled underfoot and inhaling the earthy aroma of damp soil mixed with the faint smokiness from a neighbor's distant chimney, when I snapped a few photographs of the scene before me. The sun dipping toward the horizon in a blaze of orange and pink hues that danced across the water's surface, the outline of my cabin silhouetted against the fading light with its warm glow spilling from the windows like an invitation to anyone who might stumble upon the image, and without much forethought beyond a desire to capture the moment for my own records, I uploaded one to my seldom-used Instagram account, a private profile visible only to a handful of distant acquaintances rather than the family circle that thrived on such visual updates, captioning it simply with "Finally found my spot," in a way that felt more like a personal affirmation than a deliberate provocation. That small act, born from the glow of satisfaction in having created something entirely mine through the fruits of my own labor, and that unexpected bonus, which had remained a closely held secret even from my closest work colleagues, set off ripples that I could not have anticipated, beginning with the subtle notifications trickling in from mutual connections who offered polite congratulations in the comments section, their words carrying an undercurrent of curiosity about how an unassuming accountant from Ohio had suddenly acquired such a picturesque escape, but it was the direct messages and emails that soon escalated the situation into something far more charged, starting with Mom's frantic note arriving in my inbox just after midnight. Its subject line screaming, "What is this?" in bold capitals that seemed to encapsulate the shock of discovery as she described the image she'd stumbled upon through a shared friend's repost, questioning in a torrent of words why I would make such a significant life choice without consulting the family, and expressing a mix of bewilderment and hurt that painted my independence as a personal slight against the bonds she held so dear. As the responses multiplied overnight like weeds overtaking a neglected garden, each one layering on accusations and assumptions that twisted my moment of triumph into a narrative of selfishness and exclusion. I found myself scrolling through them in the dim light of my kitchen back in Ohio, the screen's glow illuminating the countertops cluttered with unopened mail and the remnants of a hurried dinner. A wry humor emerging in the absurdity of their collective outrage over a purchase that harmed no one and benefited only me after decades of subsidizing their preferences through emotional labor and financial nudges that went unreciprocated. David's email landed next, laced with that trademark blend of condescension and faux concern that he deployed so effectively in boardrooms and family dinners alike, remarking on the nice flex of the property while probing for details on the funding source with questions about lotteries or inheritances that betrayed his underlying suspicion that my success could only stem from some stroke of external luck rather than the steady grind of my career, and as I read between the lines, the light vulgarity of his implication that I must be overreaching in a way he never had to because of the safety nets always extended his way, stirred a quiet defiance within me, prompting a response that danced on the edge of wit without descending into outright confrontation. Acknowledging their surprise while casually noting that the home was fully paid for, without any outstanding loans or family-backed guarantees, a subtle reminder of the disparities that had long favored him and left me to build from scratch. The influx continued unabated, with aunts and cousins chiming in through forwarded chains that dissected the photo for clues about my state of mind. Some offering backhanded compliments laced with envy about the luxury of such solitude, while others hinted at underlying motives like a midlife rebellion against the very traditions that had sustained our connections, building an atmosphere thick with uncertainty where every message chipped away at the serenity I'd cultivated, forcing me to confront whether this revelation had been a liberating exhale or the spark that ignited a broader conflagration of unresolved grievances. Beneath the barrage, a twist emerged that added layers to the unfolding drama, uncovered inadvertently when Mom, in her flustered attempt to rally the family perspective, attached an old email thread from years prior that she meant to delete but overlooked in her haste, revealing exchanges where David had urgently solicited funds from our parents to cover mounting debts from speculative investments in stocks and real estate ventures that promised quick returns but delivered only losses, amounts that tallied into the tens of thousands funneled his way without a whisper of consultation with me, despite my own financial strains during that same period when I was navigating a tough stretch at work without the buffer of such support. This glimpse into the hidden mechanics of their favoritism, where his missteps were quietly absorbed to preserve his image while mine were met with expectations of self-reliance, fueled a surge of validation for my secretive path, transforming the initial sting of their reactions into fuel for a more calculated form of pushback that maintained the high ground without stooping to their level of emotional manipulation. As the evening deepened and I closed the laptop with a decisive snap, the house settling into the quiet companionship of ticking clocks and distant traffic hums, my phone rang sharply with Mom's number flashing on the screen, her voice emerging strained and laced with uncharacteristic vulnerability as she insisted on an immediate conversation about the house and its implications, trailing off midway through a sentence about something you don't know about David, about why we've always. Before the connection faltered slightly, leaving her words suspended in ambiguity that hung heavy in the air like the fog rolling off an unseen lake, compelling me to grip the device tighter while my mind raced with possibilities of buried truths that could either bridge the chasm between us or widen it irreparably, the unresolved tension propelling the story forward into territories yet unexplored. The dropped call from Mom echoed in my ears like a half-spoken confession left dangling in the ether, its abrupt cutoff amplifying the uncertainty that had already begun to cloud my days following the revelation of the Poconos home, prompting me to cut short my planned return to Ohio and instead hunker down in the cabin where the sturdy wooden walls and the constant murmur of the lake provided a buffer against the emotional turbulence brewing back home, allowing me to process the influx of Messages through a lens tempered by distance and the fresh perspective gained from standing on my own deck, overlooking waters that seemed to absorb and reflect the complexities of family ties without judgment. Over the next few days, I busied myself with practical enhancements to the property, hauling in groceries from the local market stocked with artisanal cheeses and fresh produce that evoked the simple pleasures of rural American weekends, while occasionally checking my phone only to find the digital storm intensifying, with group emails circulating theories about my sudden windfall and individual pleas laced with guilt trips that positioned my independence as a betrayal of the very loyalty they had so selectively demanded over the years. That evening, as twilight settled over the landscape in a palette of deepening blues and the first stars pricked the sky like tentative promises, the video call invitation popped up unbidden from the family chat, pulling me into a virtual confrontation that I had half expected but dreaded nonetheless, my screen splitting into quadrants showing Mom and Dad from their familiar living room with its floral wallpaper and Dad's worn armchair in the background, David joining from what appeared to be his cluttered home office surrounded by stacks of paperwork that hinted at the disarray I was only beginning to uncover. Dad's voice broke the initial silence first, gravelly and edged with the disappointment honed from years of presiding over family mediations that always skewed toward protecting David's image. As he leaned forward into the camera with furrowed brows that deepened the lines etched by decades at the factory, questioning the secrecy surrounding the house purchase in tones that suggested it undermined the foundational trust of our shared history, while Mom interjected with her soft, pleading cadence, her hands twisting a knitted throw in her lap as she expressed confusion over why I would exclude them from such a milestone. Wondering aloud if lingering resentments from past oversights had festered into this act of apparent rebellion against the close-knit dynamic she had always nurtured through holiday traditions and weekly check-in calls. David, ever the performer, waited for his cue before chiming in with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of his desk lamp as he complimented the property's appeal in a way that carried undertones of skepticism about its affordability, probing gently for the source of the funds with references to unexpected windfalls or perhaps a hidden admirer. His words dripping with that casual opportunism that had served him well in sales pitches, but now grated against the raw nerves exposed by the email thread's accidental revelation. The accusations built layer by layer in that confined digital space, each family member layering on interpretations of my silence as selfishness that disrupted the equilibrium they had maintained, with Dad grumbling about ingratitude for the opportunities they claimed to have provided equally, Mom tearfully recounting instances where she believed her support had been unwavering, and David positioning himself as the voice of reason by suggesting we all needed to get on the same page regarding finances, a phrase that masked his own precarious situation and the pattern of reliance that had long unbalanced the scales in his favor. Amid the rising tide of their collective narrative, which painted my achievement as a threat to the family's unity rather than a personal victory born from perseverance, a wry humor surfaced in my mind as I observed their synchronized outrage from the comfort of my retreat, imagining the scene as a poorly scripted sitcom where the overlooked side character finally steals the plot without consulting the stars, and rather than escalating the tension with direct retorts that might satisfy in the moment but prolong the drama, I opted for responses laced with subtle wit that deflected without fully engaging, acknowledging their concern while weaving in reminders of the disparities that had shaped my choices, such as noting how this home served as the birthday celebration I had crafted for myself after years of settling for echoes of others' festivities. That measured approach allowed me to highlight the self-reliance that had become my hallmark, contrasting it implicitly with David's history of safety nets without naming the debts that the leaked emails had illuminated, and as their expressions shifted from indignation to uneasy reflection, I felt the satisfying undercurrent of revenge in redirecting the conversation toward accountability rather than capitulation. A clever maneuver that left them grappling with their own inconsistencies while I maintained control over the unfolding dialogue. Yet the exchange unearthed deeper twists that complicated the satisfaction, as Mom, in a moment of unguarded emotion, elaborated on the why behind their favoritism toward David, admitting that early financial strains from his childhood medical scares had locked them into a protective moat that extended indefinitely, while Dad shifted uncomfortably and let slip details about dipping into a joint savings account earmarked for emergencies, funds that had repeatedly buffered David's ventures, including a failed business loan repayment from a decade prior, revelations that confirmed the calculated nature of their support and positioned me as the unintended casualty in a system designed to shield him at all costs. This cascade of admissions hung in the air like smoke from a smoldering fire, forcing me to navigate a dilemma that twisted the knife of resentment into something more profound, questioning whether exposing these truths would forge a path to reconciliation or merely widen the rift into an unbridgeable chasm, especially as David's demeanor cracked slightly under the scrutiny, his earlier confidence giving way to defensive jabs about my lone wolf attitude that isolated the family further. The call wrapped up in a haze of unresolved promises for an in-person discussion that felt more like a summons than an invitation, leaving me alone in the cabin with the screen's glow fading and the night's chill seeping through the windows, where the weight of their accusations mingled with the thrill of my witty parries to create a brew of empowerment tinged with isolation, pondering the boundaries I had drawn and whether they served as protection or prison. As I poured a nightcap from the bottle of bourbon I'd picked up at the local distillery, its amber liquid catching the lamplight in a way that mirrored the flickering uncertainties ahead, my phone buzzed once more with a private message from David that cut through the politeness of the group dynamic, accusing me of playing manipulative games that threatened everything we had built, its terse tone signaling that the storm was far from over and hinting at escalations I hadn't yet anticipated. Staring out at the darkened lake where the water's surface rippled under a gentle breeze, I weighed the options swirling in my mind: extend an olive branch by inviting them to witness my world on my terms, or reinforce the walls with a silence that spoke volumes. The decision teetering on the edge as an unexpected knock echoed from the cabin door, sharp and insistent in the quiet night, pulling me from my reverie and into the unknown with a pulse quickening at the possibilities of who might stand on the other side. That unexpected knock at the cabin door in the dead of night turned out to be nothing more than a wayward raccoon rummaging through the trash bins I'd left out a bit too close to the porch, its banded eyes glinting in the beam of my flashlight as it scampered off into the underbrush with a rustle that left my heart pounding from the adrenaline of imagined intruders rather than any real threat from the family front, allowing me to retreat back inside with a shaky laugh at my own jumpiness. While the incident served as a stark reminder of how thin the line felt between my constructed solitude and the persistent reach of unresolved tensions that seemed determined to follow me even into this remote haven. Shaken but resolute, I barred the door with the heavy oak beam and returned to the warmth of the living room where the fireplace crackled softly with logs I'd split myself earlier that day, their flames casting dancing shadows across the walls adorned with framed maps of local hiking trails and a single photograph of the lake at sunrise that I'd printed from one of my first visits, sinking into the overstuffed armchair with its worn plaid upholstery to sip the remainder of my bourbon and let the revelations from the video call settle like sediment in the glass. Each admission from Mom and Dad about the financial lifelines extended to David painting a clearer picture of the sacrifices made not just in money, but in equity that had tilted the family balance irreparably in his direction. The night stretched on in that contemplative quiet, broken only by the occasional pop from the fire and the distant call of an owl echoing across the water, as I wrestled with the dilemma of what came next in this saga of quiet rebellion. Whether to extend a tentative invitation that might dilute my hard-won independence or to embrace the silence as the ultimate form of revenge, a choice that carried the weight of potential regret amid the empowering certainty that I had finally claimed a space unmarred by their oversight. Dawn broke with a misty haze rolling off the lake that softened the edges of the tree-line and infused the air with a freshness that invigorated my steps as I ventured out to the deck for my morning coffee, the steam rising from the mug in lazy curls while I surveyed the property that now felt less like a temporary escape and more like an extension of the self I was rediscovering through this bold assertion of autonomy. deciding in that moment to transform the day into a personal celebration that honored the birthdays and milestones long eclipsed by David's grandeur, starting with a trip to the nearby farmers market where vendors hawked seasonal squash and handmade soaps scented with lavender from the rolling Pennsylvania hills. Returning with baskets overflowing with ingredients for a feast that catered to my tastes alone, thick cuts of grass-fed steak from a local rancher, ears of corn still warm from the fields, and a wedge of sharp cheddar that crumbled perfectly over everything. I set about preparing the meal with a deliberate slowness, firing up the grill on the deck where the sizzle of searing meat soon mingled with the herbal notes of rosemary sprigs tossed onto the coals. The entire process unfolding as a ritual of self-sufficiency that contrasted sharply with the catered extravaganzas of family lore, each bite savored in the open air under a sky clearing to brilliant blue, while I raised a glass of chilled white wine to the horizon, toasting not just the 42nd year, but the culmination of all those overlooked ones in a gesture that felt both defiant and deeply affirming. In the midst of this solitary indulgence, a thread of humor wove through my reflections, picturing the family group chat erupting in speculation about my whereabouts with messages like, "Where's Emily vanished to now?" While I lounged in the very freedom their accusations had inadvertently secured, the light vulgarity of the thought that their drama could go hang for all I cared, adding a spark of irreverent satisfaction to the otherwise introspective mood. Yet, even as the afternoon sun warmed the wooden planks underfoot and the lake sparkled like a sheet of polished glass, inviting a future swim on warmer days, the undercurrents of conflict persisted through the persistent ping of notifications on my phone resting on the side table, drawing me back into the digital fray with an email that arrived anonymously from the family attorney's office. Its attachment a scanned copy of Dad's last will and testament amended quietly several years ago in the wake of David's string of financial misadventures, detailing provisions that allocated the bulk of the estate, the family home on Maple Street with its equity built over decades, investment accounts seeded from Dad's overtime shifts, and even a modest plot of land inherited from his side of the family, to David under the rationale of supporting his established career and future family obligations, while consigning me to a nominal sum intended for educational pursuits that ignored my long-since completed degrees and the stability I had forged independently. This twist, landing like an unwelcome guest at my private party, unearthed a betrayal that transcended the surface slights of ignored birthdays, confirming the systemic favoritism as not merely habitual but enshrined in legal ink, a deliberate framework that positioned David as the heir apparent and me as the perpetual also-ran, stirring a fresh wave of resentment tempered by the wry observation that their efforts to prop him up had only highlighted the strength I had cultivated in spite of it all. Channeling this discovery into a final, understated act of revenge, I composed a response to the lingering family thread without attaching the will or delving into accusations, instead sharing a single photograph of the deck bathed in golden hour light with the remnants of my meal arranged artfully in the foreground, captioned simply "Home Sweet Home, built on my own terms. Wishing you all the same clarity," a message whose wit lay in its implication of self-made success contrasted against their propped-up illusions, satisfying in the way it invited introspection without demanding confrontation and left the door cracked just enough for them to glimpse the independence they had never fostered. As evening descended and the stars emerged one by one to pierce the velvet sky, I settled into the Adirondack chair with a blanket draped over my knees against the encroaching chill, the inbox falling into an uncharacteristic silence that amplified the natural sounds around me, the soft lap of water against the dock pilings, the whisper of wind through the pines, and the occasional hoot of nocturnal creatures stirring in the woods, allowing space for the emotions to ebb and flow without the interference of immediate rebuttals, where the initial rage from those post-photo barrages had evolved into a complex tapestry of empowerment laced with lingering questions about the cost of such separation. Uncertainty lingered in the air like the faint smoke from the dying embers in the fire pit, prompting reflections on whether this path of clever deflections and witty boundaries would ultimately heal the fractures or merely paper them over with the illusion of resolution, especially as hints of deeper secrets in the will suggested amendments or codicils that might yet surface to complicate the narrative further, leaving me to wonder if forgiveness could bridge the gap without compromising the ground I had claimed, or if the silence itself represented the truest form of liberation, free from the need for their validation, yet shadowed by the isolation it might impose in the years ahead. Pouring one final measure from the bourbon bottle that had accompanied so many pivotal moments in this unfolding story, its warmth spreading through me as I gazed out at the darkened lake reflecting the moon's silvery glow. The night enveloped me in a profound ambiguity that invited contemplation without demanding answers, the echoes of revenge resonating not as a thunderous climax, but as a quiet undercurrent promising that whatever paths diverged next, they would be navigated on terms defined by my own resilience rather than the echoes of favoritism that had once drowned out my voice.